I'm blessed to know a few things about our guest on My Faith with Homer and Pip. His name is Tom Lynn. One is he has a deep faith, which he lives out in his family and his work, and he does not let the dirt under his settle. He is always on the go in ministries and what have you. So it's a delight, and again on short notice, to have Tom Lynn with us on My Faith with Homer and Pip. I'm Tommy Pippins, the star of the show. As far as the interviewing and all, is the man who had the vision. Steve, the Homer True. Our producer is the irreplaceable Brent Young. Homer, tee it up for Tom Lynn.
You know everything. I want to know nothing because I'm just continually fascinated by the people that you bring and how amazing their faith is and their story. So, Tom, it's no different. You get to tell us your faith, and I have an additional curiosity about where do people start? Where does Tom start, given how important it has been in your life? So, where do you start? How old? When?
Well, I would say that I'm a cradle Catholic, and I had a fabulous family growing up and great role models. My parents went to Marquette U shortly after World War II. They had 8 kids. They met. My father was the president of the Jesuit Men's Sodality, and my mother was the president of the Women's Sodality, and they were married by the chaplain of the Sodality. My father was going to Marquette on the GI Bill. He had been a liaison pilot in World War II in Europe, flew 125 missions, was decorated with the Silver Star and the Air Medal, and his faith carried him through. And his father lost his dad when he was 9, but his faith got him through a lot of hardship. And my mother, her name was Finnegan, and her father was a local politician. He was the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin in the 1930s. And in 1940, he was the Senate candidate on the Democratic Party for senator. And unfortunately for him, that was a time when FDR was trying to bring in to the party the progressives. So they threw the machine behind La Follette, and my mom didn't have to move to Washington and was able for that to make it possible for my parents to meet and marry. My grandmother on my father's side was a Lutheran who converted when he was about 10 to the Catholic faith. And my grandmother was a cradle Catholic turned atheist who was very hostile and a sparring partner with my mom her whole life. So, but they had a dear love and affection for each other. And my parents had 8 kids. They lost their 4th kid when the child was only 9. That was before I was born. And when I was 4, a neighbor down the street was a playmate of my brother's. His older siblings were already in college. He was kind of the caboose. He wasn't Catholic, but his dad died of a heart attack suddenly at age 9, and his mom came down with debilitating MS, and she wound up being an invalid. And so my parents invited him over for a weekend, and he said, "You're not going back." And he was my foster brother. And eventually he converted to Catholicism. My parents never made him go to church with us or anything like that, respectful of his childhood faith or lack thereof. And he was able to see his mom once in a while in the nursing home, but my parents raised him, and he was my older brother. And I mean, just a funny story, he was very dark complexion, kind of like Tom Pippin, and all my siblings are very fair. And my mom was in the grocery store with Peter, and the cashier says, "Ollie, who's this boy?" And she said, "Well, this is my son." And the cashier said, "Well, he doesn't look like any of your other children." And my brother Peter said, "Well, we got different fathers." So at any rate, my parents were great role models. They had 8 children. 7 of the 8 children grew up in Milwaukee. 2 of my brothers were physicians, 2 were attorneys. Peter was a parole officer for the state of Wisconsin. One of my sisters and her husband are physical therapists, and the one that got away moved to Madison, and she married her grade school boyfriend. He wound up being a lieutenant on the Madison Police Department, and she spent her career as a special ed teacher for the Madison Public Schools. And my parents had 44 grandchildren, and 40 of them were raised in the same zip code. 33 of those 40 went to the same grammar school, St. Robert in Shorewood. And my other sister went, her 7 kids went to Holy Family in Whitefish Bay. And my sister in Madison sent her kids to Queen of Peace. So my parents had the good fortune of having a lot of kids around, and they were just great role models. So I was, nursed on the Catholic faith from my childhood.
And now my favorite question, because at some point in everybody's life, they have to decide. You have this incredibly strong upbringing, but and I don't know if you remember when, where it doesn't mean you question anything. It just means it's me now. It's not my family. It's not my parents. It's not my brothers and sisters. And I have to figure it out. My faith grow. Take us, if there was such a point.
Well, I guess it was always there. I was confirmed when I was in 6th grade. My parents were very committed to Catholic education. They sent us to St. Robert, and I went to Marquette University High School. The Jesuits were very formative. They helped us learn that God loves us. And I had some great role model Jesuits. Every year we went on a retreat. I went off to Marquette U, and just like any college kid, I like to go to parties, and I probably over imbibed and had my fair share of being a wild guy. But when I was a junior, I met my now wife. She was a graduate student at Marquette. She would describe herself as a revert. I caught her after she reverted, but she was, from the time she was about 15 on, she was a militant atheist and argumentative atheist, but she was influenced by a college professor who taught her English, and she became his friends, and they're still friends. And he subsequently, later in life, after a second career, wound up teaching in a seminary in Lincoln, Nebraska, the diocese that Bishop Bruskowitz from Milwaukee was raised to being a bishop. And she stayed in touch with him, and he's been a great role model on our family. So I wouldn't say that I coldly ever really left the faith. I would say there have been times in my life when it's been quite lukewarm. After I married and had a couple of kids, a friend of mine from high school invited me to go to an evening of recollection that was put on by Layton Study Center. And I had the good fortune growing up before I was age 30, I had the opportunity to see in person 2 canonized saints. Mother Teresa was invited to give a speech at Marquette U. She received an award. I don't remember what the award was, but I was at that event, and it was very moving. And I've always had a affection and admiration for Mother Teresa and her work. And then in 1988, a guy who was at that time the head of Opus Dei, which is a personal apostle of the Catholic Church, came to Milwaukee, and he had an audience at the Milwaukee Arena Auditorium. And I had been slightly exposed to it when I was in college. Some guys I played basketball with asked me to go to Layton, and I went to a couple of events there, but it didn't click at that point. But then after hearing this guy speak and talking about making your work something that you can sanctify, that was attractive to me. So my friend invited me on a retreat, and from 1988 to the present, I've been getting a personal trainer from Opus Dei, which basically advances the idea of laymen in their work, turning their work into prayer. And it's not something that you wear on your sleeve. You just try to be a quiet witness. My mother had on her refrigerator a quote from Emmanuel Cardinal Suhard, and it was, "To be a witness does not consist in engaging in propaganda, nor in stirring people up, but in being a living mystery. It means to live in such a way that one's life would not make sense if God did not exist."
Wow.
John,
And
you're
it's
very,
a strong,
that, if I may, Homer, you're very emotional about that. Would you, it just seems to touch your heart and soul. Would you expound on that, please?
Well, I mean, we all love our parents. My mom passed away 7 years ago. And, it's just her heart.
Living on through you.
Exactly. So thank you for asking that. And, I'd like to honor my mother.
how does that honor your mother? Well, I mean, I don't want to say I don't get the connection, but like Tommy just said, to explain it, you're speaking of this and Opus Dei, and there's clearly a massive, strong connection with your mom when you talk of that.
Well, my mom, I mean, Opus Dei has a lot of things that are in common with the Jesuit sodality in terms of just quietly being an apostle through your work or through your ordinary life. It's just, you're not doing anything special. You're just trying to see God in everything.
But while being that way, you have done things. There's an action to you. Am I correct?
Well, I pride myself on trying to be a good husband. My wife having a master's in philosophy, could recite all St. Thomas and St. Anselm's proofs for the existence of God, but she likes to say that she has her own proof, and that is that we're still married.
But you've been a part of, I mean, you're of the Women's Center, or what, there are activities that you've taken a significant role in that speaks to action, even if you, as you spoke, there's a quietness of how you do things.
Well, that I mean, it started in the home, and Opus Dei has helped that. So I think of them like a weightlifting coach. So the Opus Dei, it offers spiritual support, spiritual direction for anybody who wants it. And I had the good fortune of having many good spiritual directors, but one who passed away just in February of 2020. I met with them a couple times a month for 10 years, actually probably 15, 20 years. His name was Jose Delgado, and he was the CEO of American Transmission Corporation. And he quietly didn't wear it on his sleeve, but he was a celibate. And he, very successful businessman, started American Transmission Corporation, grew up his career through as an executive at Wisconsin Electric. And he gave spiritual advice to 40 or 50 men, in addition to running a multi-billion-dollar company that he founded. But he was inspired by the teachings of St. Jose Maria Escriva. As far as the Women's Center goes, the Women's Care Center goes, that has a connection to my father and his vocation. My father was a obstetrician. He delivered somewhere between 10 and 12,000 kids in southeastern Wisconsin during a 40-year career. My parents, in the last 10 years of their life, were volunteers at St. Ben's Clinic. My father worked there for free from the time he was 75 till he was 85. And my mom worked there for free almost until the time of her death. So they were great role models. My father was very, very committed to the pro-life movement. And he was also a lifelong pilot. He took a hiatus when the kids were growing up, but when my youngest brother graduated from college, he surprised my mom, said, let's go for lunch. And he had regained his pilot's license after a 20-year hiatus. And that was when he was in his 60s. And he flew a plane once a week until he was 88 years old. And anyway, fast forward, why is that relevant? About three days before he had a major stroke, he was flying an airplane at 88 years of age. He was a very active guy. At any rate, a year and a half later, he passed away in November of 2009, November 13th of 2009. And, you know, I mean, anytime you have lose a loved one, it's a good idea to go on a retreat. So 6 weeks later, I went on a retreat with some guys from Milwaukee, and they said, hey, let's go out to this place in New York City. And it was a silent retreat. And sure enough, after the second night of the retreat, one of the guys, after the priest went to bed, said, hey, let's go up on the roof. I got beers and cigars. And he said, hey, me and two other guys are buying a building on Farwell Avenue, right across from the busiest abortion clinic in the state. And Tom, I want you to be on the board. So, I mean, I'm thinking, how can you say no to something like this? So at any rate, I joined the board and I went to the first board meeting. And one of the questions I asked is, do you guys have a medical director? They said, oh yeah, your brother Jim. So like, I don't know that Jim's ever even heard of you. So I called Jim and he's like, I never even heard of these guys. And so he was coaxed into being the medical director. Jim took over my father's practice, and he's now 68. He's delivered over 10,000 babies in southeastern Wisconsin. Very pro-life guy. He lives his faith in a way that's remarkable, because in this day and age, it's rare to have a physician who defends the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception. And that's a challenge with your peers and the medical community, and the idea that roughly 95% of Catholics dissent from that teaching, or at least struggle with living it. But he basically has been a committed witness in the pro-life movement. So anyway, he became the medical director. When we bought the building, we legally had every right to be there. The zoning was correct. And we got the Knights of Columbus to come in and renovate it. And then lo and behold, we had our occupancy permit pulled. Well, the thing is, Michael Murphy, the alderman in Milwaukee, happens to be my second cousin's cousin. And when he and his parents came to Milwaukee, they lived in my great aunt's house because his mom's sister was my aunt's daughter-in-law. And they didn't have any money. They were immigrants from Ireland. And he was raised in the early part of his childhood. He grew up in the lower flat of my great aunts. So we grew up together and we've known each other our whole lives. So I called Michael and said, hey, Michael, give me some help here. So he brokered a meeting with Michael Kovac, the alderman. My brother, he's a quiet witness. One of his partners in his practice is Sheldon Wasserman, who's a prominent obstetrician and also a Democrat politician. At any rate, my brother worked something out where Sheldon Wasserman covered for him, and he came to the meeting, and we had a nice, quiet conversation. And with a little help from the city attorney and the bishop reaching out to Tom Barrett, they gave us our occupancy permit back. We try to be good neighbors, and we've been there ever since. And in 2017, 2017, the tail end of 16, the Women's Care Center was founded at Notre Dame University in 1984. And a branch of it was brought here by a really nice, committed woman named Sharon Hootie. And she recruited a bunch of other practicing Catholics and some other Christians to help her. And they merged with something called the Pregnancy Help Center. The board of the Pregnancy Help Center agreed to merge all their shopping list of donors and combine their assets. In 2017, we became a licensee, so we became a Wisconsin-based corporation. So we are run locally, and we are a franchise. Think of it as a franchise of the national brand. The Women's Care Center is now in 12 states, 32 locations, and in my view, it's the most successful pro-life, life-affirming apostolate in terms of the whole moral issue of our time surrounding legalized abortion. Women's Care Center does not politic. All they do is radical hospitality. They just love everybody, even the people they disagree with. No judgment, just there to help somebody on the front line. So at any rate, the Women's Care Center in Milwaukee opened in 2010. We became an independent licensee December 31st, 2016. Our first executive director got us up and running. Her name was Sharon Hootie. Really, really committed, good person. We are on our second executive director. Her name is Cheryl Laird. Cheryl was an employee from the beginning. She was one of our first ultrasonographers. She still does ultrasound, but now she has taken over all the business management of the organization. The Women's Care Center is a business and an apostolate. What do I mean by that? Women's Care Center takes business principles, the idea of McDonald's and Burger King. If you ever drove down the street and you saw McDonald's, you usually see a Burger King. And that's because hamburger sales are pro-choice. What I mean by that is McDonald's knows that, hey, we want you to have a choice when you're thinking about a hamburger, and Burger King thinks the same thing. So it's marketing 101. So if somebody's going to be offering abortion services, they're pro-choice in favor of that as a solution to a crisis pregnancy. Well, we're pro-choice for life. What I mean by that is most women who make that hard decision to terminate a pregnancy with an abortion do it because they're coerced by circumstance and they don't think they have a choice. And what Women's Care Center offers is a second option. And I like to say that every pregnancy is terminated. We would rather help you terminate your pregnancy with love than terminate it with violence. And so the founders of Women's Care Center built this whole story about let's get it out of politics. Obviously, I admire what the people who are political lobbyists are doing, but these women who run this center are on the front line, and all they're about is radical hospitality and loving whoever they meet, including the people that disagree with them. And they're not coercive. One of the founders of it were all Catholics, but they made a conscious decision to make it secular so that it's open to everybody. And so it's a secular organization with a Christian heart. The founder said a woman in a crisis pregnancy does not need a sermon, doesn't need to be felt guilty about anything. She just needs to be listened to and loved and supported. So Paul Smiechek, well, let's see, a guy named Kevin Alexander was the first president locally of the Women's Care Center, but the first president of the Women's Care Center as an operating company in Milwaukee, as an independent licensee rather than a branch, was Paul Smiechek. And in 2018, he stepped down and I became the president. So I've been the president for the last two and a half, well, let's see, it's almost 3 years. At any rate, we have roughly a $1 million operating budget. We have a philosophy that all our employees should be paid commensurate with work they would do for another entity. And we don't charge anything for our services, so we got to raise money. And, you know, one of my jobs is to help other people get inspired to be generous with our organization so that we can operate like a for-profit business, even though we're nonprofit. That means we have to raise enough money to pay the executives and the staff competitive salaries. So they're there to serve people, but you know, I know that my commitment to my job at work that I'm getting paid for is it's much harder to slack off if you got a job that you show up for to support your family. You can still bring your faith to that job. Being a volunteer is great. We all want to give where we can, but it's a different story if you have a full-time staff in terms of delivering the services. So one of the reasons we do that is we want to have the organization open and competitive with the competition in the neighborhood. In other words, the competition for a solution to a crisis pregnancy. And that requires resources, and that requires people to be generous with our organization. And praise be to God, we have significantly increased our reserves through the leadership of Cheryl Laird, and we've expanded our staff and our services. We now have a location on Mitchell Street, 7th and Mitchell. So we have 2 centers in Milwaukee, and the one on 7th and Mitchell serves a primarily Hispanic population. So we went to the effort of having every staff member who works there being bilingual. And that requires a little effort, but again, it's a conscious business decision. So that's kind of the story of the Women's Care Center. Last year, about 1 in 11 live births in southeastern Wisconsin were women we helped. And since we opened, over 16,000 women have given birth to their children who met Women's Care Center and got the love and support that they needed to make a conscious decision to give birth to that child. But we don't just drop the ball and leave them, get them out and be done with it. No, we typically will have an ongoing service relationship with the women who come to us for 3 to 5 years. And we help them with referrals to job services, healthcare services. My brother Anthony is the medical director of community health clinics, federally funded clinic on Capitol Drive. And if our clients need full-blown other medical services other than connecting with my brother, the obstetrician, they get referred over there. We have helped women who were in a battered situation get referred to a safe place for them to be protected and work out of being in a tough relationship. So it's not just about saving the baby, it's about saving moms and saving families. And if you met the women, really inspiring, frontline people. So that's why I'm so passionate about helping them.
And you share what you will in terms of personal matters regarding your family, but you know, I'm listening to a man with a super faith. You're a super Catholic, and maybe for
I'm
hard
just
to
normal. I'm just a normal lay Catholic, just like anybody else.
right. I
That's
got
my life. I got plenty of defects. I try
Yeah.
to go to confession frequently because I'm a sinner.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you shared that. But my point is that I think no one can elude suffering, and you and your family and in life. Would you care to talk about, even if you don't care to get into details, your faith around suffering? What does that mean to Tom Lynn?
Well, you know, nobody escapes the cross, but I've been so blessed. So obviously Irish Catholic mother, great at motivating with a little bit of guilt. You know, I can't tell you how many times, offer it up, offer it up. That was my mom's constant refrain whenever you were feeling sorry for yourself. But, I've had so many blessings. My wife and I have 7 children. My oldest son served in the United States military, and he was ordained a Catholic priest in 2016. He is local in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. He's also the chaplain of the Women's Care Center. Archbishop Listecki is on our board, so we get a lot of help from prayer. And he had his normal challenges. My second oldest child has 2 kids, and unfortunately, she's had a rocky marriage, struggled with some her husband has struggled with some challenges with alcohol, and they unfortunately are divorced, and that's been a very heavy cross for a dad and everybody in the family, for my son-in-law, for my daughter, and you worry about your grandkids. My third oldest was an attack helicopter pilot in the Marine Corps and spent 10 years flying the Alpha Zulu, AH-1 Alpha Zulu, and he's stationed out at Camp Pendleton, and he just ended his stint with the Marine Corps. But you always worry when your kid's in a real risky job like that. So prayer is important. Anyway, and he had some really rough things. His flight surgeon, part of his battalion group, dear friend of his, 3 years ago, got hit in the back of the head with a propeller and died about 5 days later. And you're talking to your kid about this, and you're just thankful it's not your kid. But he had the difficult task of going and meeting his friend's parents and bringing them to see him on his deathbed and be the liaison for the Marine Corps. And then about a year later, one of his best friends from flight school, he had just finished something called WTI at 29 Palms in California, which is a really sophisticated flight training where you learn how to run a battle. Anyway, his friend, I'll leave his name out of it. His friend just had a baby and had a 1 week off and spent the four of them, his friend's wife and his wife and their new baby, spent a week together at my son's house. A week later, both his flight instructor from the preceding month and his dear friend were killed in a training accident. So, you got a kid who's suffering. You're as an adult, you're as happy as your least happy kid. My fourth child went to college, married a fantastic guy. They live in Glendale. She's the one that's expecting their third kid. They live a charmed life. Sooner or later, they'll hit the cross. And then last year, she had 5 miscarriages. She got sick with COVID in the early part of the year. And I don't know if the COVID had anything to do with the miscarriages, but that was a great hardship for her. She named all her babies. I carried their names and the date of their birth in my phone. Pray to them often. My next kid, talk about charmed. He went to Marquette on an ROTC scholarship, had a medical issue his junior year, and he was told he couldn't complete his commitment. So he got a job at Nestle. He was majoring in finance and supply chain management. He wound up going to finishing that, and Father Luke Strand, the vocations director, got to know him and said, "Hey, why don't your brother's a good priest. Why don't you think about being a priest?" And if you know Father Luke Strand, he's a fantastic salesman. And his parents had 4 kids, and 3 of the 4 are priests. One's a Jesuit priest, and there's 2 Strand priests of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and these guys are under 40. Anyway, he talks my son into entering the seminary. Well, my son did a year in the seminary, and he discerned out, and he wound up marrying the director of religious ed at St. Robert, and they live in Wauwatosa, and he just started medical school. So he did a complete about face after being a business major and got into Medical College of Wisconsin. My next daughter, she lives in Washington, D.C., and she works for the Dominican House of Studies, which is a think tank that is trying to advance the teachings of Thomas Aquinas around the country at different universities. And my youngest is just told me he's getting married next year. Well, he's 21. Most people think, wow, 21, that's awfully young these days. He's graduated from college. He's very ambitious, good student, and he's marrying a lovely girl. And I like to say, he's chaste and he's motivated to get married because he's chaste. Draw your own conclusion.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're hopeful that we don't have the cross that often, and I've been charmed. I've led a charmed life, got a successful career at a local financial firm. I've been with the same firm my entire career. Started here 35 years ago, just finished 35 years, and I don't have any expectation of quitting anytime soon. So I've had the pleasure of helping many, many people in my profession, and they've helped me. So I wish I could tell you I've had all sorts of hardships, but I haven't. But when something tough comes up, turn to prayer.
Pray and offer it up, those crosses. That's wonderful, Tom Lynn. Homer, anything else from you, sir?
No, I would disagree with some of his comments, like I'm just a normal whatever, but I think the story speaks for itself, and I'll let those enjoying listening and watching make that decision.
Well, I did have one really rough time about 5 years ago. Well, roll back the clock. 2009, my brother, who's 3 years older than I, closest in age to me, he was a partner at Michael Best and Friedrich. He got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And they told him he might be dead in 3 months. again, emotional memories. He turned to prayer. Really a fighter. He lived another 6 years. He was he entered the Knights of Malta in the middle of the 2000s, about 3 years before he got diagnosed with cancer. And the Knights of Malta, for those of you that don't know what it is, it's a 900-year-old papal order that you can trace back to the Crusades. And you might say they were the first people that built hospitals. So they're called the Hospitaliers of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta. Well, anyway, he quietly entered this thing. I didn't even know about it until he got sick. He took, one of the things that the Knights of Malta do is they take care of sick people. They have a commitment to the prison ministry and helping the poor. Well, one of the things they do is they make a commitment to take a person who's terminally ill on a plane, similar to an honor flight with the veterans, on a plane from the United States that they pay for the charter, and they fly to Lourdes. And they take the person to Lourdes and help them bathe in the holy water at Lourdes. And I didn't know he did this. He did this in 2008, the year before he got cancer. Well, sure enough, the guys in the Knights of Malta recruited me, and I agreed to it. And I'm wondering how the heck am I going to live up to their standards? But that's on my bucket list, to take somebody who's got cancer to Lourdes. And then there's another, my friend Frank is part of something called the Knights of Holy Sepulchre, and that's another papal order. And you know, I don't want to insult it, but they raise a lot of money and do a lot of good things with it. So the Knights of Malta is an organization that is a Catholic religious order at the upper end. Most of the members are lay people. They give alms to the poor. They also have permanent observer status at the United Nations. I'd encourage anybody to Google it. A lot of quiet Catholics, you probably know some of them. You probably don't know that they're in the Knights of Malta, but they are giving away as a group $1.5 billion in disaster relief annually. There's about 12 or 14,000 Knights around the world. And they quietly do this. And they try to help people coming out of prison get jobs. And, you know, you've got a number of them working at soup kitchens here in town. They're just really amazing people. And, you know, if you're interested in hearing about it, give me a call, or I'll introduce you to some of the people. The Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, Archbishop Listecki is a papal knight of the Holy Sepulchre, and he's reaching out to people who are trying to be leaders in the community. And their mission is to raise money to keep Christianity in the Holy Land. So we have about 15,000 members globally, and they raise a little under $30 million to support Christians in the Holy Land. They have a hospital in Bethlehem, as does the Knight of Malta. They are primarily responsible for maintaining the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is kind of an ecumenical church. Believe it or not, a Muslim, since the time of Saladin, holds the keys to it. A Muslim family opens the church, and it's occupied by Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Coptics, who are basically apostolic Christians in Egypt, and Ethiopian Orthodox. All of these Catholics and Orthodox have a common faith. They have 7 sacraments. They have a royal priesthood. At any rate, they got to get along. And take care of this church in Israel that is built over the tomb of Christ. And that organization is something that's near and dear to the Archbishop's heart. And we are trying to support people in the Holy Land. So there's a lot of good things you can do to advance your faith quietly as a layperson. And we can't just rely on priests to fix everything. We got to roll up our sleeves and try to help them.
Wow. I have to say, we're all sinners. I get that, but I'm with Homer. You're not the average guy in the sense that you are living your faith and you are following God's call. And so you can give him the glory, Tom Lynn, if you're okay with that. This has been delightful. Homer, do you want to close this in any fashion with Tom or not?
No, I want it to stand as is.
Yes. The only thing I say with
again, if anybody wants a tour of the Women's Care Center, anybody wants to help us, it's a phenomenal mission. They're great people. And, it's not about being a Democrat or a Republican. It's not about politics. It's simply about radical hospitality for women who are in a tough spot. And, there's no judgment. It's just unbelievably loving women, helping women. And as a guy, us guys, we never have to think about being pregnant. So, women helping women, and the way we can help is by helping them financially. So that's why I'm passionate about trying to help the women at the Women's Care Center.
Well, I just want to say this. Homer always has a T-shirt, and I've been thinking for a few minutes, Steve, the Homer True, radical hospitality. That's got to be at a T-shirt coming soon. We'll see. But you've been so passionate, and you want to get the word out as we close. Are you comfortable leaving an email or a phone number for those within the sound of your voice when it's posted?
Sure. It's WCC MIL at Women's Care Center, all lowercase, no punctuation, .org. You can Google it. Lou Holtz is the national, for those of you that are Notre Dame fans, I know Steve the Homer, and you have some followers in Notre Dame. And for those of you that hate Notre Dame, Google Lou Holtz Women's Care Center and listen to what he has to say about it. The Women's Care Center in Milwaukee is run by Cheryl Laird. You can reach her, Cheryl at WCCMIL.org.
So grateful, Tom Lynn, for your passion, for your faith, for your coming on with us and sharing your faith story and your valuable time. It's been an absolute blessing. Thank you.
Well, thank you for reaching out to me. I'm glad somebody canceled on the short notice and you thought to call me, Tom. And for those of you that haven't played ball with Tom, he's got something in common with a lot of the recent presidents. He's a southpaw. Am I not right?
You're 100% right. You remember my air balls back in the day at the old gym at Marquette.
Oh,
Thanks.
I thought those were passes.
Never been a shot I didn't like. We could go on and on. Thanks.
Right, well, thanks for reaching out to me, Tom. And
you bet.
Steve, thanks for your past and continuous support of the Women's Care Center. You've been a great friend. And Steve, we're going to recruit you to be an MC again.
It's a great place.
You bet. And for Steve the Homer True and our marvelous producer, Brent Young, I'm Tommy Pippins. This has been My Faith with Homer and Pip. We pray you've been inspired, and we look forward to doing more segments, all with the help of the Holy Spirit. I'm glad Homer had the idea. God bless you, everybody.
Thanks for reaching out.
Awesome.